It is loading, and we are live on YouTube.
All righty. Welcome back, everybody. It's House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. We're working on S50, and we are here today to hear a little bit more from the PUC. So I am Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey from Memorial View.
Christopher Wyndham, Michael Southworth, Caledonia, too.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Tara Torrey, Washington 2.
Frank Putner, Burlington.
Laura Sibilia, Wyndham 2.
Jack Blocker, Committee Assistant.
Jack Blocker, Committee Assistant.
Yeah, you got to hop right in there after Sibilia.
John Brayback from Monmouth Clean Environment.
Greg Day around with the PUC.
Great. All right, for the record.
All right, and good afternoon. My name is Jake Kern. I'm counsel for the Public Utility Commission. My understanding is that you've asked me to come in and talk about issues with single plant definition in state law, and it was also included in one of the bills you have, H 394, excuse me. The single plant definition serves several very important purposes under Vermont law currently. It determines the eligibility for financial incentives like net metering and standard offer. That means in statute, there are capacity-based limits for participation in those programs. So to determine whether a plant is eligible to participate, you need to have a way of determining what its capacity is and whether it is to include in that capacity, adjacent facilities or facilities that are integrated with the one that's proposed. Also, the commission's rules set rates for compensation of net metering facilities based on the capacity of the system. So if you are a net metering customer with a very small system, like a 15 kilowatt system, you get a very high rate of compensation, whereas a 500 kilowatt net metering system receives a much lower rate of compensation. That is to reflect the economies of scale that come with building larger systems. Three, also those capacity limits are used to screen for environmental and other siting issues. So I don't know if you recall my testimony a few weeks ago, the commission has tailored its siting procedures based on the size of the facility. So, systems that are 150 kilowatts or less are eligible for streamlined permitting procedures under state law under Section 8007B. The net metering rule has different levels of tiers of review based on how large the net metering system is. And then finally, the state's renewable energy standard also has capacity, definitions included in Tier 2, which is the in-state renewable energy requirement. Systems that qualify for Tier 2 have to be 5 megawatts or less. So my understanding that part of the rationale for maybe altering the definition of single plant was that group net metering is changing going forward or ending, and the standard offer program is also winding down. I would submit that, one, I don't really accept those premises. There have been several bills put before the legislature this session to either expand or change those programs so that they continue on in the future, and that's always a possibility looking forward. But also, there are just so many instances in state law and in the commission's regulations where a capacity is used to determine the procedures used, the compensation given to the facility, whether notice is given to adjoining landowner owners, all those kinds of things, where the commission needs a way to look at a group of facilities and decide whether they're a single plant or separate. And so, just to give sort of an example of how this shows up, this is a real scenario that came before the commission in the past. Each one of those little squares that you see there is a tracker, one of those solar trackers that you might see. And then next to them, you'll see a number like 19-1937 NMR. This is all one piece of property owned by one landowner. They submitted 1, 2, 3, 4 net metering registrations as 4 separate 15 kilowatt facilities. That entitled them to higher compensation that allowed them to get a streamlined review process that didn't include any environmental review or any notice to neighbors. But in reality, it's 60 kilowatts of solar arrays being proposed on that one piece of property. And it should not have been, given the higher rates for small facilities. There should have been notice given to the adjoining landowners, and there should have been some level of environmental review. There's a very strong incentive for developers to segment their application so that they can avoid environmental review, notice to neighbors, and the attendant litigation risks, and also to receive higher compensation rates under the net metering rule. So the definition that's proposed in H394 would, this would be allowed. In fact, this customer could have proposed 25 kilowatt systems on that piece of property and still fit within the 500 kilowatt limit of a net metering system, as long as they had separate wires running from each set of panels, and a separate meter. The commission feels that that's one, very disadvantageous for ratepayers because they'll be overpaying for that power, but two, it really circumvents the spirit and intent of Section 248 and allowing for public participation and review of those proposals. So the commission thinks that the current definition we have, while it is complicated and a little clunky, it's serving a very essential purpose at this point. So this is a list of things that under the proposed definition, the commission wouldn't be able to determine. The setback requirements in Section 248S, those are, again, tiered by capacity size. But if we're going to treat separate, facilities on the same parcel as separate plants, then they're not going to have, right now under current law, they'd have no setbacks, even if the total was 500 kilowatts. Which would be, I think, inconsistent with what the statute is intended to do. The res categories, if you could fit more than 5 megawatts on a piece of land, you could have multiple tier 2 facilities right next to each other, proposed at the same time, constructed at the same time, and that has significant implications for the utilities' power portfolio requirements. Section 8007, I already discussed this, that there are simplified review procedures provided by statute for small renewable energy facilities. But again, if you're allowed to cluster them all on one parcel, but call them each individual small energy facilities, those will be reviewed separately and will be using simplified procedures instead of a comprehensive procedure to look at the entire development. We also have application fees that, again, are tiered by size. And again, the last bullet here, the larger a facility or group of facilities are, if they meet the definition of a single plant under current state law, they get a more robust environmental review to reflect the amount of potential impact that could be attended to that project. We've heard several developers say that the single plant definition is preventing solar facilities from being built. That's just not accurate. It's preventing people from segmenting their development to take advantage of incentive payments. You can't build 2 500 kilowatt net metering facilities at the same time right next to each other and call it a net metering system. You can build that facility. It will just get a different payment. So the commission sees if there is a problem. It's not that this statute is preventing solar from being developed. It's that developers are trying to split their projects up to take advantage of the incentives in state law for small plants. And we would rather see larger facilities built, provided they meet the standards of Section 248, because those will have more attractive prices for ratepayers. They'll be more economical and it'll be more efficient to review them all at once. So that's my spiel on the single plant issue. I'm happy to take any questions on that or any other topics that you have related to S50. Or solar development in general. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. One of the concerns that we heard mentioned was that the limitation prevents adding on to an existing project. So there might be a project where there's already a 500 kW installation. But there's room and there's infrastructure that would support more panels. And by having, that might be added at a later date, let's say, by having the limitation, it incentivizes developers to build more infrastructure, another road, more power lines, whatever. How could we address that and still meet the concerns that now like concerns are raising here?
I mean, two things. One, with the example that you mentioned, if there is already a 500 kilowatt array there, that customer can't have more. That's not a single plant issue. That's the limit in state statute for 500 kilowatts of net metering. But say they had a 50 kilowatt system and they're like, I want to build 100. There's nothing that says they can't build 100. What's going to happen though is that might affect the rates that they get in compensation, and some people have to make a decision whether they want to accept the lower compensation rate because they have a larger system, more economies of scale, or whether they'd rather stick with their smaller investment and continue to receive the incentive rates. I think that's an inherent issue with net metering, is just that, customers have to make a decision whether if it's worth it. But I mean, from a sort of planning for the utilities power supply portfolios, we don't see this as an issue. The utilities are going to procure the amount of renewable energy that's required under the RES, and they're going to do it in the least cost manner, whether buying it from merchant developers who have market rate proposals, or by building it themselves at scale for a lower cost per unit. So,
Greg Clapper.
And to follow up on that example, we saw a picture of a solar facility that had an access road to it, and let's say it was 500 megs, 500 kilowatts. I like to say 500 megs, but we'll say 500.
Say 500 sharks.
Yeah. And then a ways on, there was another abandoned gravel pit, which could support another X hundred kWs. But using the same access road would cause it to be considered one facility. And so to develop that second site, they'd have to build a different access road, even though it was a perfectly serviceable road there.
Or the other option is that they can exit the net metering program and build a 1 megawatt facility that gets paid through some other compensation structure.
Well, apparently that makes it uneconomical for them, apparently. So
I mean, we see plenty of 1 megawatt facilities built already under other programs, so I would say it makes it unpalatable to them. Yeah.
I mean, what if those two gravel pits are on two separate parcels, but have one access road and they're owned by different people, and the second person also wants to develop a net metering facility, even though their neighbor put in 500 kilowatts?
If it's, I mean, the hypothetical here is it's completely landlocked and the only access is over their neighbor's,
there's say
right away.
a legacy access road, but it was all one parcel, and the gravel pit was all one operation. There's one road in, and they'd like to share the road without it all being considered one plant.
So the statutory definition says that if they share, there are two prongs to the single plant analysis. First, you have to be part of the same project, and second, you have to share infrastructure and equipment. So in your hypothetical, if it is a different landowner, these are being built at different times, and the planning of them is not coordinated in any way, even if they share a road, that would not be a single plant under state law. What would make this a problem is if, the same developer comes in at the same time, proposes both facilities, as a common scheme of development, then they're part of the same project, and then share an access road. That would trigger the single plant definition.
And not to get too legalistic here, but just to understand the nuance, if it were one landowner, they built the first one, and then 10 years later, they decided, hey, we were going to use that for motocross, but our kids have left the
And now-
state, so no one wants to ride in the other gravel pit now.
Plans
So
have
we-
changed.
We can put solar
Yeah.
in there now without irritating family members.
And so the same project analysis, and this is included in the statute gives us three factors to consider: physical proximity, contiguity, and time of construction. What's the time lag?
Yeah.
And then the ownership. So we would, and none of those three are dispositive. They're just factors to be weighed. So, the commission has some flexibility to look at this and basically make a decision about what's fair. Is this someone trying to game the system, or is this someone who truly has a new project, a different plan? Then that would pass the test and that would be allowed. But the statute gives the commission sort of a toolbox of things to consider when it's looking at a group of facilities to determine, was this one common scheme, or is this truly, Farmer Bob is proposing his thing and Farmer Dave has their thing. They're very close together. They almost look like they're touching, but they truly are separate. So that the statute does provide, it's not a rigid analysis. It doesn't always mandate a certain outcome. Or I should say, the facts are going to mandate the outcome. It doesn't always say that just because two projects are in close proximity, they're going to be the same plan.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Just I guess a comment and a question. It goes back to something you said at the beginning of your testimony. If I'm understanding the context right, that, this language was originally enacted to ensure that under standard offer, people weren't gaming the system, right, to take advantage of competitive under market rates or whatever, above market rates.
Yes.
To put in, multiple arrays or plants. And standard offer is ending and group net metering has ended. And there are 1,800 to 2,000 bills floating around the legislature. So it doesn't matter if bills have been introduced to try to continue those programs. The fact is that right now, I feel like we have to deal in what is.
Okay.
And right now, we've got what feels to me like a sort of vestigial law left over that was put in place to deal with standard offer that's now hampering the ability of us to put solar arrays on the exact kind of sites where we want them. You had a slide up. To me, that's the exact kind of place where we want to be making it easier to put in more solar and larger solar. I feel like Vermont is making it harder and harder to install solar. I feel like we're moving in the wrong direction.
Just focusing on what is right now.
Yeah.
We still have individual net metering. And in this bill S50 that you're considering, you're going to have a registration limit that would be increased to 25 kilowatts.
Yep.
You still will see customers segmenting their facility into individual 25 kilowatt registration systems on the same parcel to get a higher rate of compensation and to avoid environmental review and avoid notice to neighbors. The other thing is that the standard offer program, we still have projects that are working their way through the permitting stage at this point where this definition is in play. Furthermore, there is a increment of capacity in the authorized standard offer program. So there was 127.5 megawatts authorized that we issued contracts for. Those not all contracts will end up being commissioned, meaning built. And the statute right now requires us to reissue those contracts. So we will have future procedures. I don't know if it's competitive solicitation or lottery or some other process to allocate that energy, that capacity, excuse me. And so this definition will still come into play for the standard offer program in the future, presently, and at least for as long as it takes for us to get all those 127.5 megawatts, constructed, because that's what state law requires us to do. And then also we still have, even for non-net metering and non-standard offer projects, you still have this question of, what is being proposed and how do we review it? And if applicants are able to segment their applications into smaller chunks to get a more streamlined review process, the commission's not going to have a tool to get a holistic view of those applications to see what all the impacts are and to have the correct procedures to review those impacts. because it's all going to come in little drips and drabs separately, even though there is a common scheme and a common plan to build much more capacity on that parcel of land. And so the commission, I mean, if the legislature wants to make that choice, that's fine. But I just feel like we have to point that out, that we won't have the tools to review those projects the way that we do now. They will come in and they will be, treated as separate applications, and they will get the streamlined application processes that are required by law and required by our rules. And, that's definitely something that needs to be considered when you're looking at changing this definition.
Rep. Campbell?
Follow up. How does the commission uncover multiple applications now? And apparently there's some to sift through.
Yeah, there's multiple tools, but at the end of the day, we rely on applicants being honest. And that's very hard when there's a financial incentive for them to keep everything focused on just one little sliver of their development at a time. Our rules ask applicants to disclose any proposed or planned facilities that are on the same parcel with a proposal when it comes in. That's for net metering systems.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, when a proposal comes in, we can always look at our records and see if we've permitted anything on that parcel. So that's, we have tools to look at it. We also have the discovery process. When we're reviewing an application, we can ask for information. That's usually how we end up getting the information that's necessary to make a decision. We ask, who's developing this? How long ago did the construction of the other facility occur? Show us all the equipment and infrastructure. Is any of it shared? We're asking those questions, and that's how we're finding out.
Are there ones that slip through, or?
I mean, it stands to reason that there have been some, but it's not that the commission's trying to let them through. It's just that if someone doesn't disclose this information to us, we can't make that determination. If
the commission finds out after the fact that somebody has been less than forthcoming, and made multiple applications for what are in fact single plant, is there a mechanism for the commission to say, well, wait a minute, now you're going to get this different compensation level?
Yeah, we have enforcement procedures. Certainly, if an application contains misrepresentations, that would be one thing. But I don't know about omissions. That it gets murkier if someone just doesn't tell. But that's why we try to ask people and make them affirmatively state what's going on. But yes, the commission does have enforcement procedures, and if someone makes misrepresentations in an application, it could lead to significant consequences.
Okay. I guess the only other thing, unless there's other questions, I'll keep talking. Back to the question of somebody wanting to add on to an existing facility 5 years in the future or something. And we already have a disturbed parcel, maybe it's on a gravel pit or something. We already have infrastructure. We have an access road. We have an interconnection. How do we, as a matter of policy, encourage that development as opposed to building that on a different site?
Well, we have policies that, using the hypothetical we discussed before, person has a 50 kilowatt system. They want to add on. They can apply, and it's an amendment to the existing system. It's just that our rules right now, it may change how much they receive in compensation. The commission's, I think, on record expressing concerns with the level of compensation we're providing in net metering generally, and that
meaning too high.
Yeah, and so in the future, I think this issue may be addressed if net metering gets to a place where the compensation is market rate, and then these issues might change, because there isn't going to be that financial incentive, at least, to segment your application. Right. There still might be the review.
I would imagine
incentive. Well, I mean, as long as you have different procedures for different size facilities, I mean, this comes up in Act 250 and all any kind of development scheme that has some sort of size-based limitation, square footage, acreage, capacity. you say, well, how do you draw the box around what we're reviewing today? And so that issue is always going to be there. But the compensation issue, it arises out of the nature of net metering, that is paying more than the market rate. And so you're always going to have this incentive to try to fit yourself into that, into wherever the most attractive rates of compensation are. That's where the developers are going to flow first.
Right. Well, again, the distance, it still doesn't sort of get at the policy question of, in effect, encouraging development on another parcel in order, and that parcel would, that development would get a higher rate than adding on to an existing development where there's already been disturbance and already has infrastructure and all of that. And that additional development would generate a lower compensation for the developer. So yeah, I see the problem, but I don't know. I'm trying to look for the answer. If you have any thoughts on how we can get at that problem.
I think the commission's rules right now have some very well thought out incentives that encourage development on previously developed sites, low impact sites, areas that have been identified by towns as preferred sites. There might be an opportunity to look at adding into that. Is there already energy infrastructure there that would accommodate that? I think the issue is that not all sites are the same. Just because there's already a solar array on a site doesn't mean that the rest of the site is disturbed or otherwise it's, where you want to encourage development. And so when you have a rule that just applies to, there's already a solar array here and adding to it, I don't know if you can always say this is good or this is harmful. It really is a site-by-site evaluation. You're looking at, is this appropriate?
Yeah, I wonder if there's a distance and time element that might be applied or something.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has a similar issue that it faces with its PERPA program, and they apply a distance-based. They just say anything within, X distance of another facility is the same facility. Anything outside that distance is a separate facility. It's a very bright line test, very easy to implement.
Yeah.
Has different pros and cons to it. So
there's no time-based difference.
It's just a distance-based limitation.
I'm trying to understand the difference between the sort of backyard, ground-mounted, small family arrays that we're talking about in the 25 to 15 section of the bill, which are, subject to just what I understand is just your basic net metering.
Yeah.
The ever shrinking net metering rates. And then what I thought were the larger plants, significantly larger plants that we're talking about in the single plant section of the bill.
Right. Well, it's just the way that the definition is written in 394 is that the commission cannot consider facilities on the same parcel, the same plant, as long as they, I don't know the language right, as long as they use different inverters and have separate meters and interconnection points. And that's a much easier standard to meet than the current definition. And so what you'll see is people proposing just a bunch of little tulips in the garden, a sprout here, a sprout there, a sprout here, a sprout there, a sprout there, and they'll all have separate wires and separate connections, but they'll be separate plants under state law, which means they're eligible for a registration process, which means they get they'll get a different compensation structure and they'll be reviewed differently. And so that's just the way that I don't think any developers you'd be walking away from money to not do it that way. It would be economically, not the right decision to take advantage of that if it was available. I don't think that's the problem with the definition is it applies to everything, all plants, not just little ones. It's everything. So if there's some sort of relief that folks are looking to target towards residential solar, I think it needs to be more constrained than what is proposed in H 394.
Well, so the level of municipal review may have been bypassed also if somebody put in 2.2. And so the municipality or the level of public participation was limited. Whereas if it had originally been greater, more, the municipality could have commented in the registration process. So I think the concern of adding another facility next to an existing facility is that if that was what was the game then, should we put a date on it to say only for combined facilities commenced after a date, both halves commenced after a legislative date?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it really depends on what, what problem that this any change to the single plant definition is trying to fix. I feel like the definition that's been offered in H394 is, if the issue is developers are having a difficult time adding to small residential facilities, this is a way too large in scope change to address that. This affects all plants of all sizes. But I think another thing to point out is we don't do this analysis in the vast majority of cases we get. In most cases, it's clear that someone's proposing a single plant by itself. It's only in these edge cases that come in. And it's actually been quite rare that we've had to turn down projects because of it. And so, from our perspective, this just is, I think part of the regulation that comes with having a program that is limited, that is, has a capacity limit on it. And also, if part of it, when you have different procedures for different size facilities, you have to have a reliable way of saying, here's the size of the facility.
So S50 is changing the size from 15 kW to 25 kW. So does it sort of infer new systems ground mounted built after today, April 1st, 2000?
As I read S50 now, say there's a customer who already has 15 kilowatts in their backyard. They can file a registration amendment. They would be able to file a registration amendment for 10 additional kilowatts to bring their system up to 25K. Because the way the commission treats applications and amendments, we look at the gross size of the new facility and say, what's the appropriate procedure for that expanded facility? So, customers will be able to expand using the registration form up to 25 kilowatts under the S50 as it's proposed. So that, that may address some of the concerns. It doesn't address the change in compensation. That's a different part of our rule that says, compensation rates are, based on that 15 kilowatts that's in statute. Now, maybe we look at that next time we open up the net metering rule, but we haven't done that investigation yet to decide, how we would change net metering compensation.
Well, the decision that we're trying to make is, do we bring that single plant language from 394 into S50 and consider it as part of the bill? Right now, it's not in S50. It's sitting on the wall.
Yeah.
In 394. So sounds like you're not a fan.
We would prefer to stay on the wall. Yes.
Yeah, Rep. Campbell.
Follow up on that question about the 15 kW net metering competition. First of all, Rep. Howland made a very good point about the limitation on the backyard or household net metering is in the current sort of structure of things is how much energy does a house use to the course of the year, and very few houses are going to need more. I can't imagine anything really household use. But one question I was going to ask is if somebody, I'm going to add this, the compensation rate for the up to 15 kW. Presumably, we want to raise that raise that threshold to the 25 kW also, in order to be consistent. Would we not?
I mean, there's a certain amount of there are benefits to having sort of consistent breakpoints in the rule in terms of capacity, but it's not, I don't view it as like a conflict that would have to be immediately resolved. The commission's compensation structure is based on sort of assumptions about the economics of certain size systems. I don't know if the economics change materially from 15 to 25K that would either dictate having a consistent compensation scheme, or if it's like, no, actually, once you get to 25K, you're really getting big savings by buying panels, at that level. And so it makes sense to have a lower per kilowatt compensation rate. I don't know the answer to that question because we haven't looked at it at this point. One thing I just want to say is like, we're talking about the limit of the registration process. Customers can always expand their systems to 25, can do it under current law. It requires an application form. It's a little more involved, but I would submit, contrary to what I think you've heard from some people, that I don't think it's a very onerous process. We have an application form. If you are less than 50 kilowatts, you do not need to submit testimony. You don't have to do, aesthetics reviews and things like that. You can just fill out the form and provide it to us, and you'll get a review and a decision, usually within 60 days. So I appreciate that the registration form is even simpler and easier, but I just want to make clear that, it's not that customers can't expand their systems. It's that, they would prefer to use a different process to do so.
Well, and then there's the compensation difference between 15 kW
And yes.
I think, we're definitely hearing something different from the folks on the ground who are actually putting in systems. They're not finding the process to be only slightly more onerous. I think they're finding it to be prohibitive.
Yeah, certainly they've got their viewpoint. This sliver of development that we're talking about, bigger than 15 kW, but smaller than 50 kilowatts, rarely used. And I think there are several reasons why. It may be that some developers are intimidated by the application process. I don't think they should be. I don't think they've tried it. We haven't seen any of those applications. When I talk about it, when I look at those application numbers, it's, less than 10 a year that you're seeing. I don't think people are familiar with that process. Things do get more involved when you get above 50 kilowatts. I would agree with that statement, that once you get above 50 kilowatts, there is this more information that needs to be provided. But that there is an application process for that band. And I just don't think there are a lot of customers who use that amount. That's not a residential sized facility anymore. That, a 50 kilowatts, that's a ton of power. And now you're looking at someone with like a grow house or something, that's bigger. So,
but the 25 we're talking about is very clearly residential. Yeah.
We don't see them now. You don't see 50 or 25 kilowatt applications now.
I think, I think it's chicken. We're having a chicken and egg conversation. I think what we've heard from a fair amount of folks is that the reason we're not seeing them is that above 15K, the process does become expensive and time consuming.
We're currently under net metering 2.5, which became effective August 1, and that has all the layout of tier 1, tier 2, and compensation.
We don't use the tier languages for the res, not for net metering, but yes, there are different. There are categories.
Category. All right. Yeah. Well, you shouldn't use.
So many words.
Well, if you had used numbers for both of them, I may not have gotten so confused if you wanted been ABC. All right. I will review 2. Net metering 2.5.
And this bill doesn't get it the way. It doesn't. It doesn't address the net metering rates. And I'm just looking back at your original testimony. You had recommended that we strike the municipal setback floor amendment, right?
That's correct.
All righty.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Additional questions?
The subject of the municipal zone, do you have a preference between no setback requirements or a statewide setback requirement?
So we found that 248S works really well, having one uniform setback. Now, right now, the standard for very small facilities is 0. Whether that should be a different number because you've got larger systems coming in with their registration, the commission doesn't have an opinion on what the right number is, or whether there should be a number at all. But you could either leave 248S as it is and still have no setback for 15 kilowatts and under, and then have, I forget what the amount is for 25 to 50 kilowatts under the statute is, but it's some number. And, you could still have that be the case, and we would process those registrations. We'd probably add a checkbox to the registration that says, if you're greater than 15 kilowatts, but, less than 25 kilowatt or 25 kilowatts and less on the ground, you need to be X feet from the property line under state law. And we would just have a checkbox that says, do that. We wouldn't need to have any kind of like in-depth review of that. Where things would get confusing is if you have different setback requirements by municipality, then it becomes too much to try to process for us.
And I'm just looking at you'd submitted a marked up bill with your requests, and you've got the municipal section struck, and I'm trying to refresh my.
Oh, right. Yes. So I'll make my plea again in the spirit of reducing paperwork. Current state law requires owner or CPG holders to file a notice of a CPG and record it in the municipal land records.
Oh, right.
And then the state statute says they need to file proof of that recording with the commission.
That's
So
right.
we are kind of drowning in proof of recordings. We don't have a problem with recording the notice in the municipal land records.
You don't need to be notified.
We don't need to be notified that it happened.
That's right. I knew there was something else you.
Yes. Okay. So if you find it in your power to include that in S50, we would very much appreciate it. It would be it would reduce the amount of administrative work we have. We have thousands of CPGs we've issued over the last several years under that statute, and the rate of compliance is not sterling. And it's not a comfortable position for the commission to be in, to have a violation of state law that we're aware of. We're supposed to do something about it, or that's the feeling that you get. But we're not sure that it really is good public policy to have us trying to get all of those proof of recordings filed with us just to keep our records clear.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah.
Good
Thank you
afternoon.
for being here. Appreciate it. All right. So we
Thank
can
you.
stay online for a sec. Let's just look ahead at the week before we adjourn for the day. So we've got a little bit more testimony on S50 in the morning, and then we thought we could maybe do a committee discussion in Marca. Has that changed? Has our agenda changed at all, Jack? Or are we still
There might be some changes to Thursday.
okay? But Wednesday's still. Ben is coming in, and then we're going to do a committee discussion.
Yep.
So I think if folks agree, I think that would be a great time to maybe walk through our testimony list. Does that sound good? I know Jack can have it ready in time. Does that
Yeah.
sound like a plan? Okay, so I don't know, do folks think we need Ellen for that? I'm not sure if we do.
That's gonna be precisely my question, Madam Chair, is when do you envision us, for you bringing back, an additional version to us?
I think when we've discussed the bill in detail as a group, so we can talk about, and we've got how it seems logical to me anyway to move forward would be as a committee to walk through and go over all the testimony we've received so far, because we've gotten a lot of testimony. It's happened over a period of time. We've got a lot of conflicting opinions, right? Like, I think we have a lot of folks saying, leave this in, take it out, do this. I think we've heard a lot of conflicting opinions, and to me anyway, it would be helpful to walk through as a group all the testimony we've heard today. find out where we have more questions, where we need to take more testimony, maybe, or where folks have additional questions. And then see what sections of the bill we agree on and what sections of the bill we either don't agree on, need more testimony on, or we're gonna yank. Does that sound like a plan? Okay, so I'd say, I'm not sure we need Ellen for that tomorrow then. I don't think we're really marking up the bill. I think we're walking through all the testimony to date, seeing who else we need to hear from and trying to make a plan for next steps. So we could probably let Ellen go for tomorrow and just at 9:30 tomorrow, start our committee testimony review, we could call it.
Are you, hoping for us to come in with kind of flags?
I know I'm gonna try to look at the testimony ahead of time.
Yeah.
But we don't have to be. I mean, my whole idea is that we're gonna walk through everything as a group.
Okay.
And say, this is what we heard, this is what they said, these are things I still don't understand. So I'm gonna try to review stuff ahead of time. I may not have to, but the point is that I thought we could all do it together. Okay, Jack,